step away from the workstation right now.
Excuse me, who are you? I'm in the middle of peak processing. We're slammed right now.
Step away from the computer immediately. Do not touch anything else.
What is this about?
Fake vendors?
What vendors? Somebody tell me what
Mouse
the hell is
just
going
dropped.
on here.
You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit.
The agents did not announce themselves until they were already inside. By the time Jennifer Shepard looked up from her workstation, there were 3 of them standing at the entrance to her operations bay, badges out, faces unreadable, moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had already won. The floor was loud. Conveyor belts humming, scanners beeping, associates calling across the noise. Nobody noticed at first. Then everyone did. She was ordered to step away from her workstation. She was told she needed to come with them. She was in the middle of peak processing hours. She had a team to manage. She had done nothing wrong. She had done $15 million wrong. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like if you're already watching, and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and whether you saw this ending coming. The morning of September 28, 2022 looked like every other morning at Amazon's DAT1 fulfillment center in Smyrna, Georgia. The facility was already running at full capacity before most of Atlanta had finished its first cup of coffee. Conveyor belts moved in synchronized loops across 600,000 square feet of warehouse floor. Associates in high-visibility vests scanned, sorted, and staged hundreds of thousands of packages for same-day and next-day delivery. Shift supervisors walked their zones. Radios crackled. The building never truly slept, and on a Wednesday morning in late September, it had no reason to. Jennifer Shepard was at her workstation. Her screens were active, her queue was full, and by every visible measure she was exactly what her badge said she was, an Amazon operations manager, present and on task, indistinguishable from the role she had held for the past 2 years. Federal agents moved through the facility floor with the kind of deliberate calm that comes from months of preparation. They had already been inside the building before Jennifer looked up. When she did, it was over. She was ordered to step away from the workstation. She was told the situation would be explained. She was escorted from the floor while her team watched, the noise of the warehouse filling the silence that neither side could bring itself to break. To her team at the DAT1 facility, Jennifer Shepard had always been the quiet one. The one who arrived early and stayed late without asking for credit. The one who never made noise in leadership meetings, never pushed for the spotlight, and never seemed particularly hungry for anything beyond the work itself. She was steady. Reliable. The kind of manager associates described as fair and forgettable in the same breath. To federal investigators, she was the calculated architect of one of the largest internal fraud operations in Amazon's corporate history, $15 million extracted from the company's vendor payment system over 19 months, routed through 20 fake companies, laundered across 22 bank accounts, and spent with a confidence that should have raised alarms long before it finally did. Within 72 hours of that morning's arrest, U.S. Secret Service agents had already moved across Atlanta with subpoenas and seizure orders. Bank records from 22 separate accounts were pulled. Transaction histories from luxury car dealerships across the metro area were subpoenaed. More than $4,100,000 in assets were frozen, including the $3 million home in Smyrna that Jennifer Shepard had purchased with cash just 16 months earlier. The investigation had been building for months. Agents had the invoices. They had the shell companies. They had the subordinates who had entered vendor information into Amazon's system, most of them unaware of what they were actually doing. The evidence had been assembled carefully, quietly, and completely, in much the same way Jennifer Shepard had assembled the fraud itself. She was 35 years old. She had driven a Lamborghini to work. She was leaving in handcuffs. Jennifer Shepard was born in 1990 in East Point, Georgia, a working-class suburb pressed against the southern edge of Atlanta where the sound of highway traffic is constant and the distance between ambition and circumstance can feel impossibly small. Her father worked double shifts at a local trucking company, long days that started before sunrise and ended long after dark, the kind of labor that hollows a man out slowly and leaves its evidence in his posture and his hands. Her mother cleaned office buildings at night, moving through the fluorescent quiet of corporate lobbies that would never know her name. Together, they kept the lights on. They kept the family housed and fed. But money was always tight in the way that shapes a child's understanding of the world before she is old enough to name what she is learning. Jennifer was the quiet girl. Quiet in school, quiet at home, quiet in the way that children become quiet when they understand that loudness costs something they cannot afford. She was bullied for clothes that had belonged to someone else first. She was overlooked by teachers who had already made their assessments and moved on. She sat in the back of classrooms where potential was measured in volume, and hers registered almost nothing. But Jennifer Shepard was not passive. She was watching. While other children were outside, she was at the kitchen table studying her parents' bills. Not because anyone asked her to, but because the numbers made a kind of sense that other things did not. She built handwritten grids on notebook paper, due dates, amounts, patterns, gaps. She was doing, by instinct, what accountants and systems analysts do by training. She was mapping the structure of things. And somewhere in that process, she discovered something about herself that no teacher had thought to look for. She could see the places where systems broke. The gaps that other people stepped over without noticing. The spaces where the logic failed and no one had thought to ask why. It was a quiet power. She kept it quiet. She graduated from high school in 2008 and enrolled at Georgia State University, where she pursued a degree in supply chain management, a field built on the same logic she had been practicing her whole life. She graduated and moved into the logistics industry, working a series of positions that paid modestly and offered limited advancement. The work suited her mind, but the trajectory was slow. In 2017, she joined Amazon as an area manager at the DAT1 fulfillment center in Smyrna. Her starting salary was $54,000 a year. Her first performance reviews described her as average. Too quiet. Not leadership material. She was passed over for promotion while colleagues who were louder and less precise moved up beside her. The humiliation was not dramatic. It did not announce itself. It accumulated, quietly, the way most significant things in Jennifer Shepard's life had always accumulated, below the surface, out of sight, building pressure against a structure that had not yet been tested. She studied the approval workflows. She studied the vendor intake process. She studied the thresholds Amazon systems used to flag anomalies, and she learned, with the same methodical attention she had once given her parents' utility bills, exactly where the blind spots were. In 2020, she was promoted to operations manager. The promotion came with a salary increase. It came with a team of direct reports and an expanded zone of responsibility. But the most significant thing it came with was something the offer letter never mentioned and no supervisor ever thought to flag as a risk. It came with authority. As an operations manager at DAT1, Jennifer Shepard could approve new vendors in Amazon's payment system. She could authorize invoices for goods and services rendered. She could direct wire transfers to accounts she had personally verified. She could do all of this without a second signature, without independent review, without anyone checking her work. In a fulfillment network the size of Amazon's Georgia operation, she was one of hundreds of managers with this level of access. No single oversight mechanism was designed to watch all of them. The system had been built for speed, not scrutiny. It assumed that the people inside it were honest. The DAT1 facility processed hundreds of thousands of packages every day. It contracted with dozens of third-party vendors for cleaning, maintenance, staffing, equipment, and services. Millions of dollars moved through the vendor payment system every month. The infrastructure was enormous, the volume was relentless, and at its center was a single, quiet woman who had spent her entire life learning how systems fail. She had studied the blind spots for years. Now she had the keys. The first invoice was unremarkable by design. On August 22, 2020, less than 60 days after her promotion took effect, Jennifer Shepard initiated a payment request for $9,750. The vendor was listed as providing temporary staffing services. The invoice was detailed, properly formatted, and entirely fictional. A subordinate entered the vendor information into Amazon's system at her direction, unaware of what the entry actually represented. Jennifer approved the vendor. Jennifer approved the invoice. 8 days later, Amazon's accounting system wired the funds to a shell company controlled by her girlfriend, Lila Voss. Nothing flagged. Nothing paused. The money moved the way money moves inside a system that trusts the people managing it, quietly, automatically, and without looking back. That was the test. It passed. What followed was not impulsive. It was not reckless. It was the product of years of patient observation applied with the same methodical discipline Jennifer Shepard had demonstrated since she first mapped her parents' bill payments on notebook paper as a child. She understood that the greatest threat to any long-running fraud was not a single large transaction but a pattern, any deviation from the statistical noise that a system's detection algorithms had been trained to expect. So she made sure there was no pattern to find. Over the next 19 months, she constructed an invisible empire. 20 fake vendor companies were created, each with its own name, tax identification number, and bank account. The names were chosen to sound functional and forgettable, the kind of vendors a fulfillment center of that scale would legitimately use without question. Cleaning contractors. Equipment service providers. Temporary staffing agencies. Each company existed only on paper, and each paper trail had been carefully manufactured to survive a surface-level review. The invoices varied in amount. They varied in timing. They varied in description. No two submissions were identical in a way that would suggest a single source. She never submitted round numbers. She never reused exact figures. She stayed deliberately below the thresholds that Amazon's internal fraud detection had been calibrated to flag, and she knew those thresholds because she had spent 2 years inside the system that enforced them. By the time the scheme collapsed, Jennifer had submitted more than $16,200,000 in fictitious invoices. Amazon paid out $15 million before anyone looked up long enough to notice. She did not work alone. Lila Voss, her girlfriend, became the primary recipient of the fraudulent transfers. Several of the shell companies flowed directly into accounts Voss controlled, and the two women managed the incoming funds together with the same coordination they applied to everything else in their shared life. Voss was not a passive participant. She was a structural part of the operation. Marcus Reed held a loss prevention position at the Smyrna warehouse. His job, in the most literal sense, was to stop exactly what Jennifer Shepard was doing. Instead, he supplied stolen social security numbers that she used to manufacture vendor identities. The identities gave the fake companies a layer of documentary legitimacy that a name and a bank account alone could not provide. Sophie Lang, an HR assistant at the facility, provided real employee data, names, identification numbers, internal records, that was incorporated into vendor paperwork. The people whose information was used had no knowledge of it. Ryan Caldwell was an operations manager at a nearby Amazon facility. He carried the same approval authority that Jennifer held at DAT1. When she brought him into the scheme, the operations capacity expanded significantly. Caldwell approved invoices that exceeded what Jennifer could process alone, and he continued doing so even after she had departed the company. The money left the accounts almost as fast as it arrived. In late 2021, Jennifer Shepard and Lila Voss purchased a 4,000-square-foot mansion in Smyrna for $3 million in cash. There was no mortgage application. No lender review. No financial institution asking the question that the price tag made obvious. The transaction closed, the keys changed hands, and the house that Amazon's vendor payment system had unknowingly financed became their home. The vehicles came next. A Lamborghini Urus. A Tesla Model X Plaid. A Porsche Panamera. A Range Rover. All of them acquired within the same 12-month window. All of them registered. All of them driven, including, on multiple occasions, directly into the employee parking lot at DAT1, where they sat among the used sedans and aging SUVs of the associates Jennifer managed every day. Colleagues noticed. Neighbors noticed. The math that anyone paying attention could have done was not difficult. An operations manager's salary does not purchase a $3 million home in cash. It does not fill a 5-car garage with 6-figure vehicles. The gap between what Jennifer Shepard earned and what Jennifer Shepard owned was visible to anyone who cared to look. No one looked. Or if they did, no one said anything out loud. Think about the people in your own workplace who can approve large payments without a second signature. Think about how many transactions move through your organization every week without independent review. Ask yourself honestly whether you would know, whether anyone would know, if something was wrong. The first crack appeared in early 2022. An internal auditor reviewing vendor payment activity at the Smyrna facility flagged a small anomaly connected to one account. The amount was not extraordinary. The irregularity was not immediately obvious. But it was there, and once an auditor with the right training decided to follow it, the thread did not stop. What the auditor could not have known was that Jennifer Shepard had anticipated this moment for more than a year. Beneath the fraud that investigators were beginning to uncover, she had constructed a second layer that none of her co-conspirators knew existed. A shadow architecture of forged digital breadcrumbs, document trails, and carefully placed inconsistencies designed to redirect scrutiny toward Lila Voss, toward Marcus Reed, and away from the largest portion of the funds, which Jennifer had moved into accounts that only she controlled. She had spent 19 months building a financial empire. She had spent the same 19 months building its escape route. The once overlooked, once humiliated warehouse manager had not simply learned how systems failed. She had learned how investigations worked. She had studied the exposure points in her own scheme the way she had once studied the approval workflows in Amazon's vendor portal, with patience, with precision, and with the cold clarity of someone who had always assumed the end game would come and had decided, long before it arrived, that she would not be the one left holding everything when it did. Amazon escalated the matter to the United States Secret Service. The investigation that followed moved with the methodical momentum of a federal case that had already been largely built before the first warrant was signed. The agents arrived at the mansion before the city had fully woken up. It was the morning of September 28, 2022, and the house on the quiet Smyrna street looked exactly like what $3 million in cash could buy, wide, well-landscaped, set back from the road with the kind of deliberate privacy that money purchases as naturally as square footage. The Lamborghini was in the driveway. The neighborhood was still. When the door opened, Jennifer Shepard was in her silk robe, coffee in hand, facing the kind of morning she had been preparing for and simultaneously refusing to fully believe would come. Federal agents identified themselves. They identified her. They informed her that she was under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. For a moment, she looked past them at the car in the driveway, the Lamborghini she had driven to work, parked beside her team's older vehicles, visible to every associate who had ever wondered, and said nothing. Then she looked back at the agents. Her face had gone pale. The handcuffs closed. As they did, she said something that would later be documented and introduced as evidence in federal court, a quiet statement, almost private in its delivery, about having intended to pay the money back, about needing just a little more time. The words were not a defense. They were not a plan. They were the last trace of the story she had been telling herself, finally said aloud in the moment it no longer mattered. She was walked out of the mansion in handcuffs. Neighbors had already come to their windows. Some filmed from across the street. The cars remained in the driveway, the Lamborghini, the Tesla, the Porsche, the Range Rover, gleaming and perfectly still, already belonging to a version of her life that had just ended. On November 15, 2022, Jennifer Shepard appeared in federal court and entered a guilty plea. The sentencing was not lenient. The judge imposed 20 years in federal prison. Full restitution of $15 million was ordered. The mansion was forfeited. All 5 luxury vehicles were seized. Every traceable asset was stripped from her possession with the systematic thoroughness of a government that had spent months cataloging exactly what had been taken and where it had gone. The case appeared to be closed. It was not. While Jennifer remained out on bond during the period between her plea and final sentencing, she and Lila Voss began pursuing a new business venture, a high-end lounge in Atlanta. The concept required investors. The investors, conducting their standard due diligence, discovered the federal fraud charges. They asked about them directly. Jennifer and Lila presented official-looking court documents that stated the case had been dismissed. The documents included what appeared to be a federal judge's signature. They were forgeries, manufactured with enough surface credibility to suggest experience in producing them, and with enough legal specificity to imply that someone had studied exactly what a dismissal order was supposed to look like. The investors verified the documents with the court. The documents did not match any record the court possessed. New charges were filed immediately. Obstruction. Document fraud. The bond that had allowed Jennifer Shepard to remain free while awaiting final sentencing was revoked. She was taken back into custody the same week, and whatever remained of the narrative she had tried to construct around her own case, the version where the charges were dismissed, where the lounge opened, where the next chapter began, collapsed entirely. There was no next chapter. There was only the sentence. Jennifer Shepard is currently serving her term at the federal prison camp in Alderson, West Virginia, the same facility that has housed a number of high-profile white-collar offenders over the decades, a low-security camp in the Appalachian Hills where the routine is relentless and the pay for kitchen work is 12 cents an hour. She will be 55 years old when she is released. The $15 million is gone, recovered in fragments, traced through accounts, seized from assets, swallowed by the infrastructure of a fraud that consumed it almost as fast as it generated it. The mansion in Smyrna now belongs to someone else. The Lamborghini, the Tesla, the Porsche, and the Range Rover have all been liquidated. The shell companies exist only in court records. The co-conspirators, Lila Voss, Marcus Reed, Sophie Lang, Ryan Caldwell, all faced their own federal charges, their own hearings, their own accountings. What remains is the outline of a story that is, in many ways, not unusual at all. Jennifer Shepard was not a criminal prodigy. She was not a uniquely dangerous individual in the way that phrase is sometimes applied to people who commit spectacular crimes. She was a person of significant intelligence and almost no external recognition, working inside a system that had been built for speed and had made peace with its own blind spots, a system that extended trust to the people operating it and had no mechanism for asking whether that trust was warranted. She found the gaps. She entered them. She stayed until the system caught up with her. The quietest person in the room, the one passed over in meetings and forgotten in performance reviews, the one who sat in the back and studied the structure while everyone else competed for visibility, she had spent her entire career being underestimated. She had spent 19 months proving that underestimation has a cost. Stories like this one do not make the front page. They move through the federal court system in documents and docket numbers, resolved in plea agreements and sentencing hearings that most people never hear about. They happen inside warehouses, inside corporate payment systems, inside organizations that trust their managers and move too fast to look closely. They are far more common than anyone in those organizations would like to believe. The question this story leaves behind is not about Jennifer Shepard. It is about the system. It is about the blind spots that every large organization carries and the quiet, careful people who have already found them, and have not yet decided what to do.